Welcome to Design Emergency, the podcast that celebrates design as a fundamental pillar of society and a necessary enzyme for progress. I am Paola Antonelli, co-founder with Alice Rosthorn. And in today's episode, we explore the intersection of design, data, and storytelling. We're diving into the work of Domestic Data Streamers, a design studio based in Barcelona that's redefining how we engage with data, moving from visualization through diagrams and other graphic tools to actual data interaction, performance, even reenactment. And the members of Domestic Data Streamers believe that data can move people emotionally, not just inform them. And they transform dry statistics into felt experiences while using every tool at their disposal, from analog hands-on installations to generative AI, to make them come alive. And speaking with us today, we have Pau Garcia, one of the founders, and Marta Handenawer, research director. Welcome to Design Emergency, Pau and Marta.
Hola, Paola.
So, Pau, domestic data streamers are specialized in interactive installations and data visualizations that make complex information more human and accessible. And you've been around since 2013. Where does your name come from, and how did you come to focus on this particular stream of design?
Well, domestic data streamers started as kind of an experiment. We were figuring out ways that data could be expressed from very domestic objects, like things that we see in our daily life. And we were using them as metaphors for bigger things. Datifying anything is somewhat a process of reductionism, right? So when we transform anything into numbers, we are detaching it from a lot of granularity, a lot of the reality that is hidden behind. And through using domestic objects, through using metaphors, sometimes physical metaphors, we try to reconnect numbers with what they really mean, what the realities that they show.
And what did you study to come to this particular kind of profession?
I studied graphic design for a very long time. I was a terrible graphic designer, I must say. So it was a way to jump away and cross over this more objective way of looking at design, and at the same time exploring more artistic disciplines, right? So for me, it was a way to consolidate and balance a very kind of engineering education that I had, very technical graphic design that I studied, with something that was a bit more free and somehow detached of the rules.
Well, from one terrible architect to a terrible graphic designer, we found our way, right? So good for us. So, Marta, one of your favorite slogans is fighting indifference towards data. So, can you elaborate, please? Why should we all care about data?
I think the way that I explain the work that we do at Domestic Data Streamers is kind of understanding that there's a distance in between people and information, in our case, data. And the world is increasingly being explained with data, but that is not the only way. So what we're trying to do is precisely observe the distance that exists in between people and information critically and try to adjust it. It is an issue when that distance that exists is kept unpreserved and never manipulated. So that's why we are saying fighting this distance, fighting this space that is there and is creating this huge bubble of nothingness.
And to give an example, there is not the same semantic distance when we talk about data and when we use the term property or house, or product and tool, right? The first are more mercantilistic and capitalistic ideas of buying and selling, and the second from what they truly mean to people, what are the use of these things. So if we want to humanize information, that this is like a bit of what we are trying to do, like we also have to humanize the language that we use to call these things. So whenever we talk about data, we talk about what is the data language, then the ways, the grammar of it. So, for example, a bank will always say that they have recovered 1,400 properties that were in default. They will never say that they have left 1,400 homes uninhabited, right? Or that they have evicted 1,400 families. This is like a language of information that we are somehow always trying to say, hey, let's focus on that.
So, how would you translate data into that language, like really the word data? Because data is something that people don't feel really compelled to. So, is information the right word, or is it truth?
Truth is,
Well, that's a very big question for us because we are constantly thinking about what is that, as Pau likes to call it, capital T truth. Whose truth are we talking about? And it is precisely, and we are being very aware that when we're talking about data, there are many truths that we are tapping into. So there's a part where we are selecting the truths and the perspectives in which these truths are formed.
So many data designers or data visualization designers today are also making their own data sets. Do you do that? And
yes.
I asked this, yeah, Pau, tell me.
So a big part of the work we do is understanding that sometimes the best source of information is still to be generated, right? So to actually get some insights, to understand certain realities, you have to go there and also be able to capture the information, and not capture as gathering it, as stealing it from someone or from a community, but building it with them. Right? So big part of the work we do is creating devices, artifacts, exhibitions, performances that somehow give the opportunity to people to bring this information on, to make it visible, so there can be an open discussion about what we do with this data and how we can share it, how we can make it more visible.
And since you've been there since the beginning, Pau, your projects span a wide range of realms, from visualizing social issues to even helping brands tell more compelling stories through data. So, what are some of the most unexpected tools you have used and some of the most memorable projects in your 11 years of existence?
I think one of my favorite ones, and before we were talking with Marta about it was Sand Falls. That was one of the early installations we did. We were placing cameras all over a museum to track the amount of time that people will spend in front of each of the artworks. So we were somehow making a kind of Google Analytics of the attention span of the visitors in a museum. But our somehow curiosity was not focused on that, on the traffic, on the flow of the visitors. We were interested in seeing what will be the change in the behavior of the visitors when they see this data. So at the end of the exhibition, we will show this information in different sand mountains. We will create like these sand clocks, hourglasses that will show for every second it will drop a grain of sand. So when the people arrived to the end, the visitors arrived to the end of the exhibition, they saw that there was one artwork that was much more seen than the other ones. They will go back again to see it again. And what was interesting was that just making visible something that was already there was already changing the value that people imposed into that artwork, into this inanimate object. I had this random moment with a person that the day of the opening, I was, of course, very excited. So I went with my family there. I did the whole tour. And when I was in front of the artworks, I saw this elderly person looking straight to the artwork. And then I ended at the tour with my parents, and I did another one with a group of my friends. And the man was still there half an hour later. And I asked him, are you okay? Are you like, do you need help or anything? And he told me, no, the thing is that no one is looking at this artwork, and it deserves time. I love it. And for me, that was kind of a game changer. I was thinking, just by making visible this information, this person have created some kind an empathy towards an inanimated object such as a piece of wood in this. I think it was a terrible artwork, actually, but
What about you, Marta? In the time that you've been at Domestic Data Streamers, what is the most memorable or weirdest project that you've been engaged in?
So there's this piece that I hold really close and dear to my heart that was developed in the context of an exhibition about feminism and the need for feminism today. And it was through a very simple but very domestic physicalization or formalization, which was a structure made out of printed receipts, like the one you would get from a store. And it was essentially a very big display where more than 3,000 answers were printed responding to one question. What did you have to live because of sexism in your life? What did you have to live because of sexism? And people would anonymously answer that question through their phone. And the moment they pressed print, that would be existing in the space. But another layer of data would then be asked, how old are you? And that age would depend on what printer your story would be kind of printed on. And that created like a live collage, constantly changing and reacting with all these stories being printed, kind of interacting or counteracting the data and the facts that we're told through numbers throughout the big exhibition. Mind, this is like the very last moment, the very last piece in the exhibition. And the reason why I liked it because it created, similarly to the piece that Pau has described, a sense of community where I can say, this story is my contribution to this data. This is the 1%, this is me.
So, Marta, it seems like it's not difficult to make connection with people, right? Because so much of your work is about this, not only interaction, but really relationship. Have you ever encountered any resistance, or people just want to tell you their story?
I feel like we come from this background of design. I'm also a designer, then I turned into an engineer. And there's something that was very appealing for us from the very early days. That was the creation of a template that people could participate if they were willing to participate. So essentially, we create a framework that people can interact with, and they can, through that framework, through that template, be that 1%, that moment where this is me. But it's never a forced relationship. We understand, and of course, we're using design, we're using art, and there is always like that element of the emancipated spectator. If they want to go closer, look at it, and interact with it, that's fine, and they will add their own layer of meaning to whatever that we are proposing. But to us, it is just that, a proposal. We are extending an invitation for them to be part of the work, but we never push or force. At the same time, I have to say that we are working with data. And one very interesting anecdote, I feel like in our very early days, we were, of course, interacting with people out in the streets in Barcelona, where we are based, and we would be asking people, tell us the answer to the following question, yes or no? And people would say, yes to what? No to what? What am I giving consent to? Like, they wanted the full story. It is never as simple as a yes or a no. So these kind of things are also made us really good at understanding and explaining the context of our templates. So I think we got better over time.
No kidding that they wouldn't want to answer. I love that, though. So, Pau, you work a lot in partnerships with NGOs, with government bodies, with advocacy groups, like UNICEF, UNESCO, the UN in general. And you have focused on urgent social issues such as education gaps, health inequalities, migration crisis. What are some of the notable projects you have developed or are right now developing for NGOs?
So I think one of the most or biggest projects we have been working on is the transparency portal for UNICEF, which is in itself kind of a challenging piece of information because we are talking about economics, we are talking about money, we are talking also about where a big institution such as United Nations is placing the attention on and the power and the economical power into pressing like the most urgent needs, right? So it's a very political project that we somehow have to develop to be both accessible and explainable, right? So it's not only about making the information accessible, it's not only about being able to download all this data, but it's also about being able to understand it and understand the consequences and the impact of this information, which for these big organizations is a big challenge. And then for a very long time, we have been with other organizations, smaller organizations still working in global territories such as Oxfam. But specifically, we have been working with the inequality reports in Spain, explaining and showing to the media, the biggest media outlets in Spain, how to use the inequality reports from this NGO that are somehow very technical, very long, but how to make it accessible for general audiences. Because at the end, we have a lot of data, but not the time to go through all of it, right? As a society, we don't have the time to worry about all the things that are going on around ourselves. So it's also about finding which is the right data point that will somehow trigger an action on a specific person and a specific part of our community, of the society.
So I've always been wondering, Marta, when you work with such gigantic organization as the UN, What is the process and what is the outcome of these collaborations? Are there reverberations that go beyond the immediate and limited success of the surrounding group that you explain things to?
Working with such big organizations, we understand our work as a ripple effect, where what we do is at the center point of something that then can get much bigger. And so we understand that we are linked to whatever other stakeholders and interactors exist with the work that we are doing. For example, we have lately developed an installation that wants to visualize the importance of vaccines nowadays, and also how there's been a great delay in vaccination, putting us back from 2 to 5 years. And it is very interesting because this is happening while the world is having more and more conversations around vaccines, especially since COVID. So what we are doing is one piece that is then connected to a gigantic political agenda that will allow other factors and other actors to come in and make our story bigger. So we understand and we want people to utilize our artifacts for good, for their expansion, for whatever they want to achieve. And for example, now it is going to Nigeria, is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So it is precisely the reason why we love kind of coexisting and cooperating with such big machinery, because we know where it starts, but we never know where it ends.
And now, Pau, about AI. We've gone from the streets asking yes or no to the people to generative AI. And among the myriad applications I have seen in the world of design and art, your synthetic memories project has particularly touched me, especially the grainy black and white video that you often use to explain it that shows a balcony overlooking a prison. So you use generative AI that turns memories into photos or videos that have never existed. How did the project come to be?
So we have been working for a decade on data and how data manifests itself. So whenever we were starting to explore GPT-2, like the early versions of ChatGPT and all this, we started to see kind of a continuation of this work, like kind of a second generation, as it was these models were taking big data sets and transforming them into language or into images. So for us, that was kind of our natural way of following up. The thing and the problem that we kind of encountered was that we had to escape this false dichotomy of Harari saying that this is the end of the world, or Ray Kurzweil saying that this will solve all our problems. Like, this polarization in AI was a bit unnerving for us, and we tried to find ways to explain our prototype possibilities, like ways to use this technology outside of the market logics that could be actually beneficial for communities. And in this case, we were focusing on how we could reconstruct visual cultural heritage. We had a long experience with NGOs, as you have said, and one of these experiences was in Greece, in Athens, during 2015, during one of the biggest refugee crises there. And I remember myself, we were part of like the community effort to allocate refugee families in Greece. And one of the nights we were having dinner with one of these families, I remember speaking with an elderly woman who told me, Pau, I'm not scared of being a refugee now. What I'm scared is that my grandkids will be refugees forever. And I said, how come? They will find a new place. And she said, yes, but the problem is that they will now have, we have lost a big part of our identity. Whenever they ask, where do I come from, they will not be able to answer this question, because we have lost all our photo albums from the family. We have lost the diaries of my husband. We have lost our home, and for sure we have lost our neighborhood. So all this part of their identity have been gone. And this idea, this concept was stuck on us for a very long time, understanding that memory and identity is so entangled, right? So that was one of the challenges, how we can use image generation to reconstruct a part of this memory that have been lost due to natural disasters, wars, political persecution, or any of the reasons that can somehow erosion visual memories. And from there, we started to do some prototypes, some early interviews in Barcelona, and then we jumped to do like the first chapters in Brazil, in Bom Retiro, in Casa do Povo, which is a civic center. in Sao Paulo and collecting like lots of memories from different immigrant communities in Brazil and reconstructing them and showing like publicly.
And so they're shown publicly. Where can people that are listening to us see them? I mean, we're going to have Instagram posts with images, but do you publish them on your own websites? Do people give you license to publish them?
Exactly. There is, of course, always consent and full GDPR as we are based in Barcelona. But the people that want to publish it and want to be part of the what we call the synthetic memory bank, they share the rights of. We anonymize all the information, so the names are changed in most of the cases. Although some of the names are maintained because they want it to be maintained, and they are published in syntheticmemories.net, where you can find also all the information about the project and the other chapters we have been doing.
And what are, Pau, what are some of the most harrowing memories? Like, can you describe that video that opens the website?
Yes, so that's the story of Maria Carmen, who was one of the early participants of Synthetic Memories. And she, like, we always start with the interviews and the process asking, what is your earliest memory, right? Like, that actually triggers always like, the conversation. And she told me that her earliest memory was when she was 6 years old, and her mother will bring her to another's family place. And her mother will pay that family so they could enter the house, go up to the balcony of that family. And what was particular about that balcony was that they could see from that balcony the window of the prison La Modelo, which at that point in time was a political prison from the dictatorship in Spain. And that was the only way she could see her father, right, who was a political prisoner there. He was a doctor for the Republican side. And of course, that was never photographed. There was no document of this. That was only happening in the mind and in the memory of Carmen. And when she saw the image, like you can imagine, like it was very impactful for her.
It gives me shivers down my spine, so I cannot even imagine what it did to her.
Look, what surprised me most about this whole process, it doesn't happen all the time with everyone, but there is a very physical reaction to seeing your memory, something that is abstract and undefined and is only in your head, being transformed into an image that is something tangible and externalized from yourself. And something that I have come to realize is that there is also a kind of solace, a feeling of relief, of knowing that this is not only in your head, but now that you can share it with something that is outside of it. And also, because some of the interviews we have done it with families, so there is not only one person, but more than one. Sometimes it's a mother and a daughter, or a husband and a wife. And you can see that whenever they get into an image, sometimes they are not agreeing with that. But there is a point that they say, okay, yes, it was like this. And there is a kind of a contract between the two sides of saying, yes, that's the memory. Okay, let's try to make this agreement that this is what happened. Although we know that this is always subjective memory and it's imperfect and defined, and it's not like the factual accuracy of a real photography.
You say that the images that work best are the glitchy, blurry ones. So you say that glitches are a feature, and also that you're afraid of the evolution of software. So why?
I mean, one of the early considerations that we were doing is in this project is also like the ethics of what we were doing. And one of the very early questions we were asking ourselves is like, okay, precisely, what if a very old person would come in and then they would recreate a memory? But what if there was a process that could exist and like someone in the family could create the photo and pretend that it was something that was real, pretend that was an actual factual photograph, when it was actually just a representation created with AI of a memory. And that ethically was something that was concerning us. So to prevent that from happening and many other potential ethical misuses, we decided to work together with the granularity that exists in the very early models of Gen AI, for example, DALI 2, when you're using like the very early softwares, but it is a conscious design decision. We don't want to compete with a photograph. We are aware that this is a memory, and that is how the photographs that you hold into your hands should be perceived. To prevent any other ethical misuses, that is one particular design decision that we made.
And ethics is a recurrent rubric and it pervades your whole work, almost as if it were the main engine for your projects. But do you ever have to compromise? Is it possible to have a career in design without ever compromising?
No, I think you always are. It's a constant struggle. I think we have so many debates in the studio, so many situations in which we are freeze because we don't know which is the right answer. And what we I don't know, there are so many ways that we try to handle this. One of it is by prototyping it in-house, seeing, okay, how do we feel, how this is going, and then we expand it a bit, but we make like a small step. And then before showing it to the wall, we somehow ping pong with other people from other disciplines, with other perspectives. And that gives us kind of a bit of better acknowledgement of what are the potential side effects. I think there is this concept of multi-stability, the idea that you can design a knife to actually, I don't know, like cook, but then this knife can be used to stab someone, right? The same is happening whenever we create any kind of tool and any kind of methodology or any new design. So we are very much aware of it and the responsibility that comes from designing things, from creating any kind of new tools or methodologies. Although you never know at 100%. And you never know whenever you are publishing it globally on the internet in such big platforms, because you never know how someone will use this technology and use it for other things. So one thing that we are trying to do is to, whenever we collaborate with someone, we try to make sure that the people that will be using our tools are somehow prepared to use it. Right? So we make a lot of capacity building, and during the last years, a big part of the work we are doing is specifically based on education. How we give not only the tools, but also the means and the values that surround the tools.
Mm-hmm. We've already talked about data languages, which is one of the streams of research and concepts in your work. And now I would like to ask you, Pau, about another one, which is data embodiment. So the idea that experience and then data dramatization really drive the point home.
Marta, myself, Martina, and other team members, we actually met in a theater group. So performance has always been a kind of part of our practice, right? So whenever we talk about information, we never talk about infographics, but about info experiences, right? Trying to embody the whole thing within our senses. And we always make this metaphor as performance is like snow. You can store it. It's hard to predict. It happens and lingers for a while and then melts away. It's hardly useful, but it can change everything. Right? It can destroy with its weight like any kind of old and rigid structure. But the thing is that when you encapsulate snow and put it in a museum in a static way, it loses the snowball fight, it loses the spontaneity, it loses all these things. So whenever we are talking about building spaces for debate, building spaces where the information is not only informing you, but is also triggering action, you need to create a space for spontaneity, a space where people can actually feel it, be part of it. So whenever we talk and create information or information experiences, we always think of it as, okay, how we make it snow, right? For this specific project, what we were trying to do was to transform a classic theater performance into an exercise of observation in the street. And we partnered up with Eléctrico 28, Eléctrico 28, a theater company, to actually mix up both our expertise in information design with their expertise in acting and improvisation in the middle of the street. And it has been working for a year. We actually made the first show in April this year. And the idea is that it will be going from one town to the other, showing new ways to look at the street, at the data that is going in front of you.
And now instead, we just dive into the digital, Marta, there's another concept, which is that of algorithmic dissidence. Can you tell me about that, please?
I think it's best if Pau defines it, actually.
Come on.
Go for it, Pau. Yeah. Just let's throw it back to Pau. Pau,
Yeah.
tell me.
Okay. So one of the problems that we faced is that algorithms, or the way we were using algorithms, were so mediated by the market forces, right? So whenever we were using any kind of algorithmic tool to be applied, most of the times it was used to control, to optimize, or to substitute certain processes. And we started to look up for how we could use these same algorithms to actually subvert that. So instead of using tools for controlling things, we could use tools to create accountability. One of the projects we did was actually using Congress cameras in different countries all over the world to actually track whenever a politician was falling asleep, right? So we trained these algorithms to actually notice whenever someone was falling asleep, and then we started to track all the streaming sessions from parliaments and Congress in Spain and other cities and other countries to actually make a landscape and a head map of sleepiness, a politician sleepiness, right? Which somehow it's a way to subvert this tool that for a very long time has been used from these spaces of power, normally from governments or corporations, and now we were inverting it, and what we are doing now is making this whole process open source so other people in other countries can tap into this software and make it for their own country, which I think it will be interesting to see it in the United States.
Very interesting. So one of your slogans is putting life-changing data in the right hands. So whose hands do you dream of reaching, and with which data set? I'm going to start with Marta.
There's something that I find very particularly romantic, and I feel like this is kind of circling back to that idea of fighting, which is precisely the idea of doing something actively, like finding a space for things to change. And so we're all for understanding how data and data logics can be brought into action by those who are not normally in the narratives. So to me, there's always a question of those who were always out of the question, those who always existed in the margins, those whose databases never existed. So to me, there is something where our work can invite those people back into action, back into the fighting where we as domestic believe they should be.
Amen. Pau, you.
For me, it will be about one of the most boring topics of the world, that is taxation, taxes, and bringing that to schools to show how terrible is the situation, how unequal with the bunch of billionaires that are somehow not paying the taxes. So just showing that in the school and making it visible and just showing it to everyone, really. I think that could, with maybe 5 years or 10 years, change a lot of stuff. Just creating this acknowledgement that we live in such a crazy moment of capital concentration in a few hands.
Amen. You're fomenting revolution, and it's the right way to go. So thank you so much, Pau and Marta. You have been listening to the latest episode of Design Emergency, the platform and podcast that Alice Rosser and I founded in 2020 in the middle of a worldwide unprecedented emergency to highlight the fundamental role of design in all aspects of life, especially when it comes to emergencies big and small. You have heard today from Pau Garcia, one of the founders of Domestic Data Streamers, and Marta Handenawer, its research director, who have spoken to us about the importance of making data come alive so that they can be understood and acted upon by as many citizens as possible. Yet another example of how design can help us change for the better of all humans, all species, and all planets and stars. You will be able to find images that explain their work in our Instagram feed, which is at design.emergency, and we hope you'll come back for more. We will be uploading new episodes periodically, and we're looking forward to continuing the discussion with all of you. Thank you, Pau. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.